Well, greetings everybody, and welcome back to this week's edition of the Inworld Review. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. We weren't here last week, so if you were looking for it, tough. We took a week off because, well, we didn't really have a decent lineup of guests ready. Also, this week, we are coming to you half an hour late. We got a bit of a shock earlier because our main studios over on the Great Canadian Grid suddenly vanished because the Great Canadian Grid has gone down for 4 hours maintenance. So we're actually coming to you from a sort of duplicate studio on Metaworld's own grid, which is well, it's hypergrid enabled, but it's not designed for lots of people popping in, basically. And so better late than never, I think, is what we say. Anyway, I am Mal Burns, for those of you who don't know that. Even my avatar here looks slightly different, but there's going to be a lot of morphing going on later when I become a complete mesh. Mess. No, mesh. However. Whatever they say. A mesh of mess. So I will be a mess of mesh before too long. Right. And I'm joined, as always, by James Atloud to my right, who's also multitasking, of course, on operating all our cameras. So welcome, James.
Oh, I'm happy to be here, Mal. It's a great exercise to set up and move to another location, so I appreciate it.
It is indeed, and apparently my frame rate here is doing wonders for you, so we won't complain about that. And next to me on my my left, your right, as it were, we have from the OS core developers, Melanie Milland, who you may also know from Avination, and of course the Avination code is now being merged into OpenSim Core. So welcome, Melanie.
Oh, thank you for having me.
A pleasure. And we're also joined by a familiar face, Marcus Llewellyn, who is, I think I could safely call you from the Avacon grid, actually, these days, but is obviously, you know him as somebody who stood in doing filming here on occasion and various stuff. So good to have you here, Marcus.
Hey, Mel. Thanks for having me.
Now, our discussions of late have been all over the place as far as the metaverse is concerned. We had people like Adam Frisby here from Sine Wave Space, and we had Dieter here from the Cyber Lounge, which basically is a kind of version of OpenSim that's on the web. It's not OpenSim per se, but you can import your region from OpenSim into a format that displays on the web, and a whole load of other things going on, including Philip Rosedale's venture High Fidelity. Well, we really thought it was about time that we both had an update and actually looked at a few issues pertaining to what is increasingly called vanilla OpenSim, meaning the OpenSim core. Are you familiar with this expression, Melanie? Vanilla OpenSim?
Of course.
Oh, cool. Okay, fair enough. Do you know the IMA? Are you familiar with the IMA, Infinite Metaverse Alliance, who are holding a lot of sort of meetings, so user focused once at the moment?
Well, I did come across it, but it's not that I've really looked into it.
Right. Well, I think the phrase vanilla OpenSim is where I first started hearing it used all the while, you know, as opposed to other things like Ariba Sims and Halcyons and who knows what. But you know me. I think I've got my head around what's what.
Obviously, OpenSim is the root project of all of this, and pretty much the first thing that tried to do a virtual world apart from Second Life themselves. So now it's had so many offshoots and forks and further developments and so on that all exist in parallel, that referring to OpenSim really could mean any one of them, and they all have distinct names except for vanilla OpenSim.
Exactly.
So, a term had to be found, a term had to be coined, and one was coined.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, all these other things sort of come from the same place, even though they may have gone off on very different tangents over time. And the IMA, particularly, as setting up servers to test virtually every installation for various things. And I don't envy them, because they can no longer just install one breed of OpenSim, so to speak. They're installing all sorts of different variants to stress test and do various things like that. But we will get to that a bit later. I will say, I was contacted by Roddy Mackey on the Great Canadian Grid during the week, and obviously the OpenSim Community Conference will be coming up before that long. But he pointed out to me that he'd heard that the original date of OpenSim was 2007, and that we should be doing a 10th anniversary celebration. Yes, folks, we are 10 years old.
Yes. In a way, yes, we should.
Oddly enough, mostly because of Sine Space, which is a completely different mesh platform, I'm in touch quite a lot with Adam Frisbee, who, of course, was one of the co-founders way back when. And I actually was saying, do you remember?
I did work with him.
Do you remember the date? Do you remember the date? And he swears it may actually have been the end of 2006, but we don't want to spoil the good parties, so we can think of this as 10 years of OpenSim. I think, give or take the odd month or year.
Well, it really was at the point where you could actually log into it in 2007, anyway.
Yeah. Yes.
I remember there were things in there like draw stuff. Draw stuff was a way to draw to the screen of the local PC from the physics scene, because otherwise there wouldn't have been no visualization because you couldn't log in yet.
Good point. Yes. Interesting. Did you have to do things like develop initial regions and things as proof of concept? Offline before you brought them online, kind of thing?
No, it's always been online. In the very, very beginning, things were hard-coded.
Right.
Hard-code a prim here, like that sort of thing. But at the point where I joined, it was just about possible to log in. You could put prims down, you could place the prims in different positions, but if you rotated a prim and you shut down and came back up, the rotation would be gone, it'd be back at 0. That was that early.
Very good. Hey, this sounds like, what is it called, Minecraft? Or maybe Lego. Yeah, so
it's actually quite sophisticated. Ever looked into Redstone?
Yeah.
You know what Redstone is in Minecraft?
Oh, sorry, no, we're talking. I'm just thinking Redstone. No, I don't. Tell me.
Redstone is a way to, with Minecraft blocks, represent even complex digital circuitry that actually works in World.
Ah, right.
Block Minecraft just because it's blocky.
Yeah. Well, I changed my mind very early about Minecraft because at first I didn't really like the kiddie thing of Lego, but I'm used to working with digital images for a lot of my life, and it's all about resolution. And quite frankly, the highest resolution scan of a painting or whatever, Mona Lisa, God knows what kind of resolution. At the end of the day, you zoom in enough, you'll end up with a pixel. And I simply think of Minecraft as the smallest element.
Pixel is the cat who walks through walls.
Yeah, but I mean, the smallest element, is always the fundamental element. But the more you build, and the more randomous your projects, as it were, at the end of the day, it's not necessary that anybody's ever going to see those primitive building blocks. I don't mean prims, I mean Minecraft blocks. So, even that method of building and creating can be, quite compelling at the end of the day. So I can quite imagine you could do intricate machinery with those parts and then just zoom out, as it were, to, conceive of it at the real size.
Now, unlike Minecraft, where they went and started trying to simulate digital circuitry, there used to be something in OpenSim called ninja physics.
Oh, that's a new one.
Ninja was a physics system that wasn't designed to simulate just a single object. It was designed to simulate things like wheels and hinges that would actually work. You know, a vehicle in Open Simulator in NSL is built on the everything is a sled paradigm, where basically it just slides over the ground. Ninja physics would have given us actually rotating wheels with actual contact points. Unfortunately, though, there wasn't the UI and there was no cooperation between viewer developers and OpenSim at that time, because they were also focused on SL being the only world that they ever be interested in, and OpenSim just being something that'll probably go away in a year. They didn't give us the UI for it, so you had to define the Ninja physics as strange cryptic things in the descriptions of objects, and nobody ever used it, and eventually was taken out again.
So would that if that had been successful, would it have required a complete new viewer?
No, it wouldn't have required a complete new viewer. It would just have required the viewer to give us some extra options to click whether something is like a hinge, whether something is an axle, things like that. That Linden Labs had, from the source code of the viewer, actually always envisioned, but probably dropped on the grounds of complexity, because designing an object that has actual moving parts, it's something that they didn't really consider. And then there was a demo at one point where it was Inworld actually demoed their physics. And they had things hanging on physical chains with actual interlocking links. So anyway, I figured out the scale that was at, and it's clear that obviously the interpenetration solution of ODE as OpenSim had it wouldn't work with that. But at that time, Avanation already had the UB ODE engine, the one that's in OpenSim now.
Yeah.
And I was able to actually build the same thing that they did, but at half the size. You know, in physics, the lower you go with the size, the more complex the calculations get, because interpenetration versus full penetration, well, the margin of error is just much, much smaller when you have a smaller scale. So we had chains dangling in the wind and things dangling from chains and whatever. It was fun time, actually, as was the thing with figuring out the stair error. You know, it used to be you couldn't go up the stairs unless they were southwest. If they were northeast, you just wouldn't get up them.
Oh, that's. I was talking to somebody earlier today. He doesn't. He declines to come on the show because he says he doesn't like public speaking. And I said, hey, it's just like a Skype call. But he was experimenting with a farm region OpenSim, and he's come across this problem, something totally different. He doesn't quite know what it is, but he's found he's been doing something, and he finds that when he can fly northwards and northwest and northeast, but he can't fly south, and it's something to do with a directional thing, and he really can't figure it out at all. But I think he's been messing with code, and he's obviously done something.
I can tell you something now. On the 10th anniversary, it's maybe a good idea to drop down into history before we face the future.
Yes, more than Mario. I'm sure viewers would love
the stair problem was actually caused by the fact that due to an off by one error that was only discovered by yours truly in I think 2010, there was an issue where avatars would drop through the floor.
Through the floor?
Through the floor, yes, because see, when you have an avatar, the avatar is represented as something called a capsule. And the capsule is actually to the physics system just a line. So if you take a grid of rebar and you stand a pencil on it, if you don't stand it on a crossing, it'll fall through, right?
Yeah. Yes, now, I discovered this. Yeah.
Ground mesh is like that grid of rebar. And if the avatar doesn't collide with the ground mesh exactly at the point where there is a vertex, it'll fall through because the faces have no physical reality.
This is
the off by one error caused the avatar to occasionally land off by one, like 1 unit beside a vertex, and it will fall straight through. So that was solved. I'm not sure. It was Teravus or possibly Adam, not sure. One of those two solved it by tilting the avatar capsule. And the tilted capsule, that's why the avatar could only go up one way, going up the stairs.
And I believe that method is still used even by UBODE and physics. I mean, by bullets.
As a straight capsule because it's got the off by one fix in.
Well. I'm fascinated. I'm going to just. I'd love to explore a bit more history, and we will. But I'm just going to go back to the chap I was speaking to earlier. His name's Bob Wellman, by the way. PM Grid, I think he's got, and he has. He did say I could cite his name, so I think I'm safe here. He was experimenting with a line in OpenSim region by region, which basically. You would know about this. I'm going to ask you about this. I'm sure you won't mind. I think if he can figure it out, he'll be offering a patch to Core or whatever. What he figures is in OpenSim with VAR regions, right? It is a massive amount of terrain for the viewer to load when you come in. And unlike objects and things, terrain doesn't go into your cache, as I understand it. So when you land in a VAR region, it's loading this sort of 16 by 16 tile of the whole region. And that can take, in a vastly big VAR region, up to 5 minutes on some setups. And during that time, you can't teleport via the map because the map's too busy writing itself, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, that's what you mean, and I've heard of that. I've never experienced it, but then on the other hand, my stuff's pretty high-endy, and so is my internet, but I can see how that can be an issue in somebody who is like on a 2 megabit connection, or potentially somebody who's on a metered connection. Oh my God. So, yeah, I know about that. And there was an application introduced that will do lazy loading of the terrain.
Yeah.
So it basically works with the view distance to load the terrain only when it's actually in view.
Right. Well, Bob came up with another solution that he's tested in several configurations, although I think he wants to get the latest 09 code or whatever it is and test on that too. But apparently in the OpenSim for any given region, you can there's something you can do to remark out the terrain is set to true normally or something, and it can be set to false. It's not a line that's in there already. It's a line that I think it's Austin Tate sorted for him. And what it does is, let's say I come here, which is like a local grid. It's a big VAR region, but I'm covering all my terrain. Instead of terraforming, I'm covering all my terrain with meshes, so that you eventually can't see underneath to the real terraform, right? The real terrain. Well,
but that's something that Nebadon did ages ago, and most of his large regions, they're all mesh. I personally, I'm not really fond of this because a quick fix terraforming in world is impossible. You need to go out world into Blender or whatever to change the terraform. So that to me is a definite drawback. It's a definite drawback for me actually that Open Simulator's viewers never adopted any kind of mesh vertex editing tool. But there you are.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm the other thing I quite liked about it is having explored Adam's World space recently, and as far as I can see, high fidelity, I don't know the details. You are effectively, you have to go into Unity to author and things like that, and until there's some minor Inworld tools. So it's a matter of authoring software and then uploading. But the space you go into is like a complete void. Right, and unless you've authored terrain, there ain't no terrain.
If you look at any game engine, be it Unity, which is what he uses, or Zenko, which is the former Paradox, or Unreal, or really anything. I mean, even CryEngine, they all don't come with a standard default terrain pre-made. I mean, they have a floor. They have a floor in the editor, but in the game, there isn't anything.
Well, this is what Bob. I suddenly saw parallels to this because forget mesh for a minute, but this region here, for example, it's equivalent to 16, right? Regular regions. Now I can actually make a region-wide prim to cover the ground. And I can make 16 of those to cover the whole thing. That's just an ordinary one, single prim for each region that covers the terrain that hasn't been terraformed. And that it's not a mesh or anything like that. It's a simple prim you can make in World. Now, you can't elevate that or whatever. You have to build on it. But apparently, if you mark out the terrain code, right, what actually happens is, although the position of the ground is still registers, in other words, you're 20 feet above the water, 20 something's above the water anyway. Apparently, the fact that the terrain doesn't need to draw because you can't see it, right? You remark it out so it never draws, because what's the point in drawing something you can't see? And because by remarking that out, everything, especially VAR regions, apparently are loading phenomenally fast because the fate terrain, the prims on the ground, are actually objects that are in your cache. So if you've cached what is the substitute terrain, then you don't need terrain as such. So I suddenly find myself thinking, well, I could be sitting on an open sim here where there's actually really no terrain underneath me. You see terrain because I've put it there. In some cases, it's a prim. In some cases, so it's fancy, it's coming as mesh. But and
there's one thing that is a drawback of the solution, and it's probably not something you're going to see in your use cases, and that is that terrain collides differently from a prim with avatar capsules. So if you use this, it's perfectly fine for 3, 4, 5 people walking around, but you want to have a party with 50 people, it's going to drown in collision messages and die like quad.
Yeah, you got to be careful of that. Or you can wind up with people, the physics engine just completely missing avatars altogether, and they'll fall right through your mesh.
No. A physics frame is a physics frame is a physics frame. No, it's just when the physics frame becomes longer than the ticket to the next physics frame, and your sim essentially freezes up. Essential network services don't get to run. Your avatars are being thrown off, and eventually the thing will just crash.
Okay. I know it used to happen. It used to happen with the old ODE. It could if you had too many avatars on a prim, they could just wind up falling through. But that was a long time ago.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. That was before the introduction of the physics step stuff.
Okay.
Okay. Well, when Bob actually does his next test, I will actually encourage him to round up 20 avatars and see if they prove the workaround is not going to work.
It'll slow it down massively. You see, the thing is this: there is such a thing called a collision message.
Yeah.
The collision message is not something that the physics module does. The collision message is something that is done by OpenSim. Collision messages are processed for prims, for meshes, for avatars, but not for the terrain, because the terrain can never contain a script to work with these messages. So a collision with the terrain is a one-sided collision, whereas a collision between an avatar and anything else is a two-sided collision. So it's double the work.
Whoa. Okay. I think I understand that.
So the terrain is somewhat special.
Right.
Yeah, and the other thing I think a lot of region creators or operators need to keep in mind is it's just like, designing any object in World, you need to plan for your users. The more complex an object is, obviously the hard, some of those users are out there with not the strongest CPUs or GPUs. So you have to plan for that. And if you're creating a region that's 4 kilometers in size, that is a colossal region. I mean, that will literally take an avatar 5 minutes to fly across at top speed. So, I mean, you have to ask yourself, do I really need a 4 kilometer VAR region,
at this point, if somebody's using the 0.9 code, region crossings have actually evolved to the point where for most cases VAR regions are no longer necessary.
Exactly. I mean, and that was going to be my next point. I mean, you know, unless you have, you know, some edge case where you know, region crossing isn't working for you, you know, let's say you have a boat that does something, you know, that just isn't working right. And, you know, that might work well on a 4K region. But, you know, for I think for most people, you know, if you only need a kilometer, only use a kilometer. You know, it's gonna, you know,
256 meters, only use 256 meters.
Exactly.
Which one of you has actually ever been to the Avenation Welcome region while it was still up?
I have. It was a long time ago, but I have.
I must.
You see the ferry?
The ferry? No, don't remember.
There was a ferry boat going back and forth between the Avenation Welcome region and the Avenation Freebie and Shopping region. Now that ferry was running on a path that was being set by using keyframe motion, and on every run it would cross the sim border twice. One going here, one going back. That ferries run for weeks and months on end without any problems, just crossing sim borders all the time. And the peak of our testing, the ferry actually crossed the sim border with 11 avatars on board. And it didn't crash and no avatar got logged out.
Yeah, and I think there's no question that vehicles are the #1 reason people, you know, want to move to a VAR. They don't want to have to deal with region crossings. So
I can handle vehicle region crossings. As I said, we had 11 avatars set on the thing. 11. I think that's probably a record for OpenSim.
I wouldn't doubt it.
I think Marcus is right and says that, you know, the focus for a lot of us is the end user. And yeah, why bother having something like that if people don't need it is a very valid point. I tend to think of it more in terms of, I know there are kind of OpenSim installations used by educators and conferences and things like that, and they basically want more than a single sim can offer. But they want to be able to control it like a single region rather than have to go to each region and, you know, set, you know, matching controls and stuff like that. But they're the exception. They're the professional user rather than the end user, if you see what I mean. And also, you know, the magic of virtual worlds is that you can raise a prim and you can do a bit of amateur terraforming. You know, if you raise a mountain that looks like a spike and goes into outer space, then you learn from that, as I did.
Well, it's happened to some people, and that was even easier to mess up and less easy to fix before the tool strength slider came in.
Oh, yeah.
Like way back when in, don't get me wrong, might have been 2009.
So what happened before? It was that there was just a default elevation to the height map kind of thing with each click?
The tool strength was basically fixed, but OpenSim had an issue there with rounding and type widths that when you raise the same spot repeatedly, it would just hit the upper reaches of the atmosphere and touch outer space, and your sim would crash, and that terrain would be unloadable. That's why originally OpenSim was created to save all historic terrains. There was never a means for the user to use this to step back to past terrains, but they were there just in case one of us fucked up their terrain and had to reload the old one. And it turns out that that made the databases grow like to hundreds of megabytes in size with just old discarded terrains that would never be used again. So we changed it to only store one, but by that time we had the algorithm nailed down far enough that a sim crash because of an invalid terrain wasn't happening anymore. You know, nans, I mean, I'm not talking about grandmothers, I'm talking about not a number. Nans are contagious. So any number that is combined arithmetically with a nan becomes a nan itself. So once the terrain contained a nan, the entire terrain became nan, and that crashed the viewer.
Oh, beauty. Yeah, I love it. So basically, you stopped that happening. You stopped anybody being able to do that, I guess.
Well, I didn't. I believe it was Taros fixed that.
Yeah, but you as the core people, yeah. I think many people are very grateful that was fixed. I mean, because I can imagine somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, like me, goes into the air a bit, so you can't quite see the elevation, and then just put raised land, and before you know it, because you're looking from overhead, you don't realise just how far you've raised the damn thing.
Well, when it pokes you in the behind.
Yeah, you do know that, I've got to admit. But then you've got to try and figure out how to flatten half a region,
Yes, and at that time, the flatten tool didn't work.
Oh, brilliant. So we really have come a long way, haven't we, with all this? I mean,
it's quite enormous. It's everybody's contributed to that, has done a great amount of work, and deserves definitely all the recognition that they can that we can possibly give them, especially the members of the early hour that got the thing to where it was even possible for me to log in, even though I've met all the founders. I'm still a Janie come lately as far as development concerns. I did not start on the bare metal. I started when it was just about possible to log in. I looked at it once before when I couldn't log in, and there was just simply no way I could see how to use this, so I backed off and came back half a year later, and then it reached the point.
Now, looking back on this wonderful history, right, there are obviously milestones. The obvious milestone for me is Krista bringing on the hypergrid online. But
yes, that has a backstory. The hypergrid was created on a napkin. Yeah. All good things are.
Yeah. Are there any points?
A napkin in an Indonesian restaurant in Amsterdam.
Oh. Yes.
That was eating with Krista on our pretty much first face-to-face meeting, and we hashed out how things would work. I did give her lots of pointers, and I did a lot of scaffolding on the classes that Hypergrid uses today. It was just when I was working on Robust, actually, but she was working on something for academia and needed Hypergrid for that. And I agreed to step back and lay no claim to it and helped her behind the scenes instead. But most of this, I would say the Hypergrid is maybe 20% my ideas, 80% hers, and it's 100% her work.
Yeah. I actually very fondly remembering. Sorry.
She went and found a way to fool a viewer into believing that a sim on another grid is actually a sim on the same grid, and that's what started it all off.
I actually have fond memories, and I didn't really know her at the time. I knew her as her, sort of vaguely knew her as, she had a performer avatar, didn't she? Not Krista, it's, oh God, I've forgotten it. But she gave a talk in what was Second Life at the time about this thing called the hypergrid that didn't exist.
Yes, she's Diva Canto.
Diva Canto, that was right. And she stood there, rezzing prims, and she each prim of different size was representing OpenSim. And then, of course, at that point in time, she had to conceive of the lower level and the middle level and the upper level of the hypergrid and try and explain how, you know, the teleport system went crosswise and vertical. And she was standing in the middle of this, meant to be on the podium giving a talk. So she's covering the audience with layered prims trying to describe what it was all about. And it was great fun because she was so totally, you know, well, it was just great. I do remember that very well. And then, of course, you know, eventually it came. But that was another point. I mean, can you remember any particular landmarks, like all the viewer tools working or something like that before the hypergrid? Is there anything before the hypergrid that you'd put us down as a landmark?
Well, the first landmark that I've actually was in the project to see was geometries, meaning scenes, prims, colors, whatever, actually staying across a reef start.
Right. Yes, that is useful.
Because that was always the case. Then I remember videos of Teravus and Nebadon and just playing around, throwing physical stuff around. Nebadon loves throwing physical stuff to this day. You need to see his coin stack video. In that he has a stack of coins, about 200 or so, I think, that are actually interpenetrating. And they're stacked up in a tube in the middle of a sim, and then he takes the lid off. So the interpenetration resolution accelerates the coins upwards, and you have a confetti rain of coins. And that is actually one of the next milestones, was to have working physics that transcended just moving around and bumping into prims.
You see, I remember that. That's about when I started. When I started, there was the inventory wasn't working, and we only had the very basic, the POS physics.
Yes, physics of simplicity.
Yes.
That basically just handled collisions with the ground, and that was pretty much it. Everything was phantom.
Yeah, and I remember for me, that's when, it was just useful enough. I mean, I was still basically mostly active in Second Life, but OpenSim was, at that point, it became just useful enough to prototype things without having to log into Second Life or its beta grid.
And the next milestone was one of my doing. It was actually the point that caused me to join Core. And that was X-Engine.
Oh, yes, I remember. Yes, because before that we had, .NET Engine.
Yes, and .NET Engine was a pretty much monolithic thing. It was not really extensible, even though it was intended to be extensible. The way it was built meant that it could be extended only into a clone of itself, but not something completely different.
Yeah, and I have to say, I sometimes complain about X-Engine, but when I remember how the .NET Engine was, it was a huge a huge improvement. .NET or X-Engine has its quirks, but it's definitely miles above what .NET Engine was, and it was a bit of a time of it was hard for people to transition in a way because. Everybody had their old scripts, and nobody wanted to have to change. And there was even a point where I don't know if it's even still supported, but there was a point where you could put a special message at the beginning of a script to signify which script engine that script was intended to run on.
Well, you're mixing apples and pears. The special message at the top of the script was meant to distinguish between JavaScript, VB script, and C# and LSL, and it was introduced much later.
Okay.
.NET Engine and X-Engine never actually were able to coexist because .NET Engine wasn't geared for coexistence.
How in terms of time, right? My first home, as it were, thing, on OpenSim was with Chris Hart & Co. Reaction Grid, and I seem to remember that one of the things that made them different from some of the others was that they were using Microsoft servers, and would that have been the .NET thing? Is this about that time?
No. Let me think. I mean, Reaction Grid existed at that time, yes, but I don't know if the beginning or end of Reaction Grid in any way. No, it didn't coincide with the introduction of X-Engine at all. Now, X-Engine is something that I developed for my own use, for my own grid. And then I decided to go ahead and give that to the community. And the issue was that they would only accept tiny little patches, and then they go through a lengthy review process. And if I put in like cumulative patches, like having 3 patches, one building on top of the other, people got confused and said that's too much and we can't take that and everything. So basically, it boiled down to the point where I said, if you make me core, I can maintain that stuff myself. I'll take full responsibility for it, and we can just bring this in, or else I'm withdrawing. And then that engine is going to become a commercial product and not available to the general public.
Right.
So there was a bit of back and forth in core, the core at that time, of course. Now,
and they said yes, we'll take it.
I am not the most easy to work with person as a person. I'm a bit difficult.
You're legendary for being difficult sometimes.
One just needs to wrap their head around the way mine works and try to deal with it because, well, that's it. Deal with it.
And it's especially hard.
They had a discussion more over me and my ability to work with core rather than the merits of my technological solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's especially hard on I think on IRC when you're talking, in text because the emotion doesn't come across.
Well, I'm just the bad bitch of OpenSim.
Well, you're blunt. I mean, I've been on IRC for forever, and you're just very blunt. You just say what you think. And a lot of people, unfortunately, I think they take some of your statements as harder than they should. Just because you come across, like I said, very bluntly.
What can I say? Boo-hoo!
Well, it's like, it's like great artists. You don't dare look at it until they've finished it or criticize it because it's their masterwork. But swings and roundabouts. For some people,
it's
it
like
has to be like that.
Mantis, for instance, I'm the one who regularly closes things with comments like "Mantis is not a forum. Go to IRC."
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. Most of the time, you're absolutely right.
They're trying to make it into discussions, and sometimes it even goes down to ad hominem attacks. So I had to shut people down. I had to shut conversations down. I had to make topics private, and I had to tell people to just put on their big girl or big boy pants and get on with it. It's because nobody else would.
And I think it's so easy to focus on negatives and forget the positives. I know, just speaking for myself personally, Melanie, you've gone out of your way to help me personally, and I've seen you help other people personally many times when you didn't have to. And for OS Grid, when it crashed, we would not have OS Grid if you hadn't helped out. It's just that simple. Remember, nobody's just one thing. Nobody's just,
nobody's just a bitch.
Right, exactly. Everybody's multifaceted, and Melanie is definitely
except for ogres. They have layers.
Tell me, moving back onto, I suppose, a contentious point, really. And, I'm one of those people who sometimes wishes I had a tag saying I don't do text. Like people say I don't do voice. I was talking to Bob earlier, and he put me on to, I think James was there, actually, or for part of it. He put me onto the transcript of the developers meeting on Tuesdays, isn't it, from last week. Mm-hmm. And I was reading through this, and the last line says, "Oh, well, we've been nearly 2 hours. We better close this now." But reading it, right, I thought that was, if that had been voice, it would have been a 15-minute session. And do you feel maybe we should come to this a bit later when about the state of the dev at the moment? But do you? I mean, I know you do voice because you're here with us now. But do you feel that communication with a lot of developers is inhibited by using what I might call, the electronic equivalent of snail mail or snail conversation?
Well, a lot of people, like, for instance, Ubit, do voice with me. I don't know. I'd have to ask him for the actual reason why he doesn't do it with others, but I think he's probably just shy about his accent. He's Portuguese.
Fair enough. I know.
So
people like
Steva lives in the US, so her accent is barely noticeable. But Hubert there is a bit of a doozy.
It's funny. We've had this problem a lot with well, not the French, because they won't speak anything else unless they're forced to. But the Germans, there's a big German Summerfest going on, and it's a lot of different open sim regions getting together. You know, they're all German regions at the moment.
You mean
yeah, but some of them are very nervous about coming on here or something. Oh, my English isn't very good, and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, I usually find most of it.
Again, boo-hoo. I'm German.
Well, you don't sound it, and you live in England.
I used to have a German friend over on Second Life. His name was Norbo. He was actually a mentor of mine, and when they introduced voice at first, he didn't want to talk either, which was a shame, because once he actually finally started talking, it's like, wow, your English is excellent. I mean, it always was in chat. And, I think his thing was he learned business English. So he was less sure on idioms and things like that. But, yeah, I thought, he has a definite German accent, but it's very understandable. And, it's a very nice voice. It's a shame he didn't start talking earlier.
And then you have another thing that you will find is quite common across the metaverse, is that most of the men are men, but half of the women are men.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that, of course, leads to the point where those will never voice.
Well, how much of the developers talking in chat in IRC is because it's a better medium to multitask? I mean, you can be doing some code and then catching up on 4 lines of communication, contribute something, then go back to code.
Yes and no. And no. Actually, I can code while I talk, but I can't code while I chat, because if there's a chat going on, it takes all the bandwidth my fingers have.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
I couldn't agree more. Half the time I'm in a meeting, I ignore the chat and wait for somebody to turn on their mic. In fact, I was interviewed over in Canada the other day, and this woman who was interviewing me said she'd had a bit of a hard time. She'd be coming up to my avatar, and I was AFK, and I said, well, all you need to do is say, hi, Mal, and I will hear you in the next room. In real life. Because to me, it's the natural thing to do. You come up, they may be away from the keyboard, so you say hi in voice, and then they come running and say, hey.
Yeah, I mean, I have no hang-ups with voicing. I can do that in English. Ich kann das auch in Deutsch. In that sense, it's not an issue for me, but it is an issue for many. Also, there's one more thing that needs to be taken into account as a psychological factor, is that voicing with somebody exposes much more of your personality, of who you are, than just text. Now, other people in the developer community at large, not even Open Simulator, but across all the projects, I have barely met anyone who isn't on the spectrum, who isn't some sort of an autistic spectrum member, from very, very low to barely functioning levels. We have lots of developers, for instance, especially on the viewer side, who go dark for 3 months at a time. No word when they left, no explanation when they come back.
Sure.
So that makes for a let's say quite varied landscape of people who aren't always easy to follow. It's a tough one to follow anyway. This Open Simulator, it's been a trip.
Yeah, I think the voice thing, there's pros and cons. I mean, so Ember, we do Hypergrid Safari. I mean, she's, she loves the voice things, but they don't make a point of it because it is so international. That you don't get so much done in text, but at least people wear translators and things like that. So
can you yet remember the uproar that came up in Second Life when they
voicing.
when they announced voice. It was a totally divisive topic, and that almost tore Second Life apart.
Yep.
Then again, the next thing that almost tore Second Life apart was the UI overhaul. They did several one of those.
Oh, yeah.
Every one of those was vilified. At the end of the day, every one of those except for viewer version 2 worked. Version 2 didn't work with that monstrous sidebar.
Oh God, the thing
Yeah.
first it slid out and it didn't resize. It's resized the screen and distorted it. Then it stopped doing that, but you couldn't get the button to slide it out quickly. That's fair enough what we got now. But I remember the voice thing. The voice thing was my attitude to the voice. Really, is if I got business to do, virtual world or not, I want to get somebody on Skype or Talking World and collaborate. And if I,
sometimes you require a text record.
Oh yeah, maybe a transcript or something. But people transcribe. I don't know. I mean, I can see, as James pointed out, you could have, say, an IRC channel where people aren't constantly attending; they're just picking up messages and contributing to a conversation. That makes sense to be in text. And
yes, but IRC is idle relay chat. That's what it really stands for.
That's great.
yeah, that's very true. Mine only pops. Actually, it's usually you that pop up on the OpenSim one, setting something or other, I think, and then nothing else happens for days. But no, I really, it's a contentious thing. But if I was a developer and I was in a meeting with core developers, I would somehow feel that we should be in voice, not as end users who might be nervous about their voice or something, but because of the purpose of the kind of meeting. But whatever it is, I'm just sort of raising it because I suddenly saw the meetings of the minutes, of the dev meeting from Tuesday, and I thought, I've just read a transcript that took 15 minutes in voice, and they're complaining they've been at it for 2 hours. And there's a bit of a disconnect there for me. I thought it was rather funny. But moving back to history and stuff. I mean, the other amazing thing, although it was actually just one line of code, I gather, was when finally the layering, the lower, middle, and upper layers of the hypergrid were solved. Simply as one line of code that fixed all that multiple coordinates and allowed you to jump anywhere on the hypergrid, wasn't there? And
yes, but there was a single line of code in the viewer, unfortunately. So it did take some time to percolate down to all the different spin-off viewers. And actually, there are some viewers being in use today that haven't adopted the code just because they've been static. I read that as dead, like the original Hippo viewer.
Oh, interesting.
So there are still some viewers out there that actually are not past the 4096 region barrier.
Well. Does anybody use them, though? That is the question.
Well, they have some diehard users.
Yeah.
But obviously the majority these days uses some derivative of Singularity, and the most common viewer that you see is Firestorm.
Yeah, even I'm back in Firestorm at the moment, although I was in Alchemy for a long while. But
yes, Alchemy was basically like the root project that developed on the V1 viewer tree. That Singularity took pretty much every patch that Alchemy put in. They produced some of their own that Alchemy took back. Everyone else took it from there. But with the Singularity team more or less being thrown into disarray, and yes, it was because of the tragic leaving of Latif Khalifa.
Yes, of course, and I'm a big fan of that.
Even though he was a very, very contentious part of the Singularity team, and everybody hated on him when he wasn't there. He was actually the glue that kept the project together, and he was the prod in the side of the developers to actually make them work something. And now that he's gone, everybody's slipped into complacency, and nothing else is being done.
Yeah, Latif
I'm a huge fan of Radagast as well. I'm although it's offline right now, I would now, if I was in this world, I would be logged into the main grid and Canada with Radagast simply to get messages and interact between them. And that, of course, is one of 6 projects that's now been revived. But yeah, a wonderful work.
Yes, but as I'm saying is, even though nobody really liked him, he was a very much driving force of the effort, and at the end of the day, he was open metaverse.
Yeah, he was a brilliant. He was a brilliant guy.
What actually killed?
And, you must know, Melanie, the best thinkers, I'm not thinking of the name, are often the least social. You can't be all things to all people.
That him. It was his distrust of the medical establishment.
Oh, right.
So he was dealing with a condition where he didn't necessarily believed what the doctors were telling him. And tried living life his own way, and turned out it caught up with him in the end. I had some quite in-depth and soul-searching private conversations with him.
Yeah.
So yes, all I can say is he's one of the great and tragic personae of the development of virtual worlds in pretty much all of the history.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the protocol, I mean, there was probably, and feel free to correct me, Melanie, I don't think there was anybody who knew the actual protocol better than Latif. I mean, with him gone, I don't know that there's anybody.
There wasn't anyone who knew the protocol from him at the time when we were actually reverse engineering. Obviously, now everybody can know the protocol by just going to the viewer code. But at that time, yes, he was definitely the authority on it. And I believe that the translation of the messages.text into the message class in the Open Metaverse library, which is one of the central points of the entire thing, that was, I believe, his work. One time I was looking at submitting a patch to the Open Metaverse library. It was my first patch there, and I had actually made a patch to that generated file, faithfully reproducing what the generator would have produced if the input had been right, because the Lindens had not updated the message map, and I didn't know about a message map, and I had no idea that that was a generated file. So I wrote like 150 lines of code that could just as well have been represented by 5 lines in the message map. But it was Latif that jumped on that and said patch isn't acceptable because you're editing a generated file, and go back to the drawing board. And well, I did.
How much do you sort of hinted on something there, changing the subject a bit. How much do you feel that the development of OpenSim has been helped or hindered by Linden legacy code?
It's definitely been hindered to no end, but the most important part is not even the Linden legacy code, because that's in the viewer. The most important thing is iClient API. Now, it was actually a valiant effort by, I believe it was Adam, to break up iClient API into a number of smaller, more manageable classes based around iClient core, that would allow a client to implement only a certain subset of functions when the client doesn't understand or understands differently any of the other stuff. But it wasn't really used by a lot of people, and only a few plugins in OpenSim use it today. It still exists, hasn't been ripped out. But anybody who's tried to write a client using iClient API soon found that iClient API is so closely tied to the Linden model that to write any client other than a Linden client is doomed to failure. So Dahlia actually was able to create a client for Open Simulator by not using iClient API, but instead using a regular region module, duplicating the functionality. So at one point, I believe, was Adam. And also there was someone else whose name I don't recall, a Japanese.
Did those clients have names? Can you remember them? Are they buried in the archives somewhere?
Well, the one that Dahlia did, she actually did 2 distinct projects developing alternate clients that never saw the light of open source, because if any weight can be given to her indications about wanting to sell them, she probably sold them. I'm saying she here, but it's well known Dahlia is a guy. But
and the business
rolls off my tongue that way. It rolls off my tongue that way, and I can't help it. Anyway, then there was DTL. DTL actually did a demo of a Unity-based client, and I believe that research may have gone into space.
That's interesting. I also know that when Reaction Grid moved to Unity stuff and Jibe and that, I do remember at some point in time, Pathfinder Lester, John Lester had a kind of prototype of it was like a viewer, but the viewer had been built using Unity, not the world, but just the viewer. But I don't think that proved to be ultimately usable, or just wasn't taken far enough.
The issue with viewers in other than Linden type of code bases has always been the issue of dealing with dynamic resources. You see, Unity, Unreal, Paradox, Senko, CryEngine, and what's that name again? I don't recall. Anyway, they are all meant for games, and games usually mean that we're dealing with something that's called pre-baked or cooked content. We're dealing with baked-in lighting. We're dealing with pre-computed shaders, pre-computed shadows for static objects, and things like that. Things that are being done at design time rather than at runtime, and those applications just have a hard time coping with a 100% dynamic environment. The web viewers then also are limited by WebGL. WebGL isn't quite up to snuff even yet. So I can render a 3,000 object scene in WebGL, but not a 15,000 object scene.
Oh, that's weird. No, I think
the fact that WebGL is driven by JavaScript. Go figure.
Yeah, this whole JavaScript libraries, aren't they? Yeah, there's something came up. Oh yeah, there's something that came up recently, and again, it was over at with Adam at SciSpace. Is that some of the creators out there. We're getting a lot of visitors in our region all of a sudden. I wonder if they're trying to find us. Never mind.
Do you really want them to?
Not particularly, no. Just I want to show you that we don't do audiences because they lag us. Anyway, sorry, I couldn't help but be distracted there. Yes, it was a thing of the kind of equivalent in space, which of course is principally altered in Unity, of like web on the prim. Apparently, WebGL can't cope with a web page inside a web page, and because the world, if you're in the space client, the media on a prim, although it's not a prim, is fine. But if you enter via the web using the WebGL client, it can't cope with another web page being inside itself. So it's not there yet.
No, it certainly isn't. Eventually, I've got to say, I hope it will never get there. Now, you would say, how would a forward-thinking person want that to not happen? But I can tell you why, quite simply. this world that we live in today, this online world we're living in today, basically revolves about the paradigm of the entire experience of the internet being squeezed into one single executable, the browser. It's supposed to do everything, and it's on track, like for instance, with a Chromebook, to pretty much run the entire operating system. And that is not the way that things can go, because the internet, as I always said, it's something I started to say back in 93, 94, when I coined the phrase, the internet does not start with www. Because at that point I was giving people a domain, like one of mine, and they say, also you mean www dot, and I said, no, www doesn't enter into it. Just what I said. The internet doesn't start with www.
No, it's,
and the web has been the first really commercially exploitable protocol in the internet, but then again, it's only one of the protocols. And I believe that we need to get back to a place where one program does one thing and does it well, the Unix way. And we don't shoehorn everything into the browser just because we can and just because the user expects it there. We need to take these things out of the browser and then maybe embed specific applications that can do the functionality within the browser for ease of access, but it should not be done by the browser.
Well, I think we've had discussions about this before at places like OCC, where you know the you have the things. Oh, no problem, Grumpy. We're recording a show. Do sit in and listen. Just keep away from the stage. Right. Sorry, we had a visitor. Yeah, to me, the whole browser thing is the idea of easy access. If I can duplicate the studio, save an OAL file, and put it in Cyberworlds, for example, or Selby's non-profit web worlds, that is great. Right, it's a duplicate, but it doesn't have anything like the functionality. It's simply a method of posting a link in a Facebook or something.
Yes, exactly.
And
exactly. We do not want, and we do not need BertieBot's browsers in all flavors.
Yeah, and you know the idea is to give people a taste of what the virtual world is about, not to move the virtual world to the web. I think to some extent they go hand in hand, but we've already seen rather crazy exercises in private meetings, like the IMA, where somebody gets a link, right? They follow the link. It's a web link. It opens a world in a browser, right?
Yeah, now, but that's what I'm saying, because the browser isn't capable of displaying that, and we need to take our lead for the PC from the mobile world, and Apple's already gone there, and they've been successful with it, and Google's already gone there, and they've been successful with it. Microsoft's going there, slowly but surely, we are moving, look at your mobile phone one of these days, we're moving away from the browser and back to the app.
Well, exactly. I mean, there is, if I've got a virtual world that's on the web and I open it on the iPad, I think, well, why the hell isn't this an app? Why do I have to open the bloody browser to get to it?
Why isn't Google an app? Hey, it is. Why isn't the bank an app? Well, it is. Why isn't the forum an app? Hell, it is. So on the PC, the same thing needs to happen, and we need to go back to the app. We need to go back to specialized code. But today's processors, today's protocols, today's application profile sharing and linking make it such that it is much, much easier today than it was 10 years ago to prevent a cohesive environment while still using separate apps. So yes, I'm saying I hope that virtual worlds never 100% come to the browser. I'm hoping that there's going to be some sort of like a generic virtual world app that we can just link to with like a vw://tag.
It's exactly what you're saying. I mean, the www is not the internet. It's the World Wide Web. It's Tim Berners-Lee's baby.
Yes, and it is a hypertext transfer protocol.
Yeah,
It's
and
all it is really is annotated text, and everything else that's been pushed on top of it has been pushed on top of it. 90% of that has been pushed on top of that by people who wanted to do more effective advertising. Now we're looking at a shift, at a paradigm shift in the World Wide Web that sees the end of the advertising-funded web. We are living through that phase right now as ad blockers become so prevalent that ad block detection and ad block counter detection become a topic. There is going to be a trench war fought on the internet, not in Belgium. At the end of the day, internet advertising is going to die again, like Quad.
I totally agree. It has to, because it's just overkill. You know, Netflix is your cinema, and it's delivered via it's on the internet, but it's delivered via front end on the web, and apps and everywhere they can push it. But I sit down.
I have on Netflix because I watch it on a Fire Stick.
Yeah, I sit down, right, and on my iPad, working right in the morning, I follow all my news feeds. I stick with good old RSS, right? If the RSS doesn't tell me enough, I avoid the link. I very rarely click through to the real page. If it's interesting, however, I don't send it up to Twitter. But or one of my feeds. But incidentally, for anybody listening who wonders why maybe I didn't post a link to what they were doing on my feed, if I click on the link in my RSS feed and the page I get to is noisy, it's got a video running, which is an advert, the sound comes on, you don't have any choice about it, then I don't care how good that relevant that article is, I ain't tweeting it for you, because I don't want my followers to go to a web page that is basically
only for you. Great. I've got my browser castrated to the point where it doesn't play video except when I jump through a hoop, because all the autoplay videos. I've got ad blockers up the yin yang. I've got anti-ad block lists, ad block killer lists, so kill. I've got all sort of rules in place on the on a plugin that allows me to selectively hide items, even though I load them to bypass ad block detection. I mean, look at the video pop over on the Daily Mail.
Okay, I don't want to go there. Daily Mail does not get...
I'm not sure. One of these sites, when I click through there, they have a video at the top. You scroll down, the video just pops out and moves itself over the text in the lower right-hand corner, because they want you to really want you to play their video. So, I made a rule that just kills all the video on the page, period. It just takes it out. So none of the video...
the way I look at it is the aggressive... The aggressive. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. But no, what Manny was telling me, and I totally agree with, is that this overkill saturation point is going to be the end of the. The web's got to move on beyond that. I mean, to me, the web's always about pictures and text and research. It's not about commerce. But
these days it's different, because these days the web's being commercially exploited, and that's like about 98% of its use. Research is gone. I mean, there's some research still going on the Usenet. I mean, if you can ever find the Usenet, because it's buried under alt pictures, erotica binaries, or whatever it is.
Yeah. But I'm thinking
barely any bandwidth left because of all the porn. I mean, I know the internet is for porn, but you know the machinima, right? The World of Warcraft machinima.
Oh god! Well, there must be enough of those.
The internet is for porn. Google it one of these days. It's hilarious.
The the point I was really finally going to make there, that actually though, is I think more pertinent, because you and I do this app blocking and stuff like that. We know how to do it. We're technical enough to control our own workspace, and for our own productivity. We know what we're doing, and many people in working corporations and offices and things have that taken care of for them. But I think the death knell is going to be the end user, because the end user doesn't necessarily know how to get rid of those frigging Daily Mail videos. And more and more people,
end user, as annoyed as they are, they will just simply stop visiting the site.
Yeah,
which means the site will only be read by people who are able to crystallize things down to the information that they actually want, which is such a negligible percentage that their advertising revenue, regardless of for what reason, is going to drop to the floor. So what we're going to see is, for any work-intensive content, we will be seeing paywalls going up.
Yeah.
Then the paywalls aren't going to work because nobody's going to pay the Daily Mail and the Sun and the Mirror and the Guardian and the Times and the FT, and nobody's going to do that. So what's eventually going to happen is there is going to be a development of a information microcurrency, something that everybody subscribes to who publishes news articles, and you buy news articles in bulk regardless of which outlet you read them on, and all the outlets that don't participate are going to die.
Yeah, I something like that for sure. I mean, excessive advertising kills your readers, and without your readers, you can't get advertising. That is a very simple equation. You have to pay.
The key word there.
Advertising on the internet is a cowboy business. It's been like that for years, and everybody thinks the gravy train will roll on and on and on, but they are so much mistaken. Before I went into virtual worlds, I was in audiotext. I don't know if any of you remember what audiotext is. It's when you call services on the phone.
Yeah.
It's dating services, horoscopes, whatever. I was developing the stuff for that. I was actually working low level ISDN. That was back when there was a PST, and it's all voice over IP now. But I was working that kind of stuff, and it also had the issue that they were trying to do all sorts of things with ads, and it backfired, and then everything went to the internet, and audiotext died again, like Quad. I don't know if any of you even remember Quad.
No.
Quad is quadraphonics. Is stereo for speakers.
Oh God, yes. No. I was at.
It died before it was ever really sold.
Well,
so
I worked at
became like a saying.
I worked at a Pink Floyd concert back in the 70s up at Nebworth Park in Hertfordshire here, festival kind of thing. And they were so enthusiastic about previewing us. I don't think it was Dark Side of the Moon. I think it was something before that, with quadraphonic sound, And they, this is a big festival crowd, nearly 250,000 people. And putting 4 speakers around the area might have seemed like a good idea, but anyone, unless you're in the very center of that crowd, you didn't get quadraphonic. You got whatever was coming out of the nearest speaker. And
back in those days, they were actually not at the point where they had now, where they have systems that calculate the delay lines for a number of speakers, 8 or 10 or 12 speaker sets being distributed to the audience, with base speakers distributed somewhere else, and they're all synchronized in such a way that they're reducing phase interference for every single person. I'm a sound engineer also, in case you haven't noticed.
Yeah, no, I mean, the stuff you could do now is very different. And of course, when they do surround sound now, it's coded for a surround effect. But
I started back then using stuff and learning stuff and building studios. This was a genius guy named Lawrence Duhart, who actually invented a way to transfer stereo information across AM radio in a way that was compatible with single speaker radio. That was in '82.
All right. Right, I'll tell you what, I think we ought to get back to the metaverse when it comes to the history, or we'll be talking about the last 50 years of history, tech history. But before we do, I have a quick question for you. It relates to all this because we both obviously agree on the advertising overkill and everything else. I was talking to somebody in a hardware store earlier today, and he's just bought a DK2 or something. Basically, it's the version he's got second-hand, the version of the Oculus before Facebook bought it, and he thinks it's wonderful, and he's playing with it, and he's obviously a bit of a, he likes playing with the tech itself, but. Facebook bought Oculus. Oculus is certainly not the best of these three devices. They're now going to come out with cheaper versions. And Facebook is sending up these posts all over the place to open the discussion about how they're going to incorporate advertising in the virtual world. I mean, there's probably just one word you've got ready. I don't know. But what do you think of Facebook in all this?
It's a four-letter word.
Yeah, I thought it might be. Fair enough.
apart from that, the Oculus retail product and the Oculus DK2, which I happen to also have one of, it's so much inferior to the HTC Vive, which currently is the headset of choice. I have one of those too. So I'm working with that on a different project that has little to do with virtual worlds as you know them now, but may at some point in the future converge.
Right. I think I think with what they now call VR and AR, there is a loss of. We're on a new. We're on
HoloLens sitting here, and I haven't even tried to play with it.
Yeah, we're on a whole new path of convergence. Really, we've always talked about digital convergence, but these new import and output devices they're all out there on a limb. There's not they're not ready to converge yet, as it were. They have their uses, of course, but and you're right. HTC Vive is the one that is taken over. Melanie, bridge for a few. Sorry, I got distracted by a text message here. Is that oh, can't see. Is some bridge for a few nature? Oh, I see. Oh, fine, fair enough. Sorry, we just lost Melanie for a few minutes. I might be following her shortly, but the show must go on in the meantime. Right. Okay. I'm going to assume that when Melanie gets back in a second, we'll go on with a bit of history. Marcus, you had a few points there on. You've been around a lot. What are your thoughts about OpenSim landmarks in the historical timeline of things? Anything that you regard as?
Oh dear. Well, I think, it's hard to beat hypergrid. It really is. Hypergrid is what has really distinguished OpenSim from say Second Life or anybody else really. We've tried to distinguish ourselves another way. We've had mega regions and VAR regions and things like that. We've oh dear, it's hard. It's actually hard to think of things when you've been using it for so long. You start taking them for granted, and it's not until you do things like pop into Second Life and feel the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm still amazed. For example, I'm performance. OpenSim really performs far better. I think. It's amazing how well it performs. I mean, you still get 40, 50 people in a region over on Second Life, and you're screeched to a halt. That does not happen on OpenSim.
Well, we had in Second Life, we had regions with 120 people on it. Nobody can move, but at least it doesn't crash. In OpenSim, 50 people can move, but 51 people crash. It's just like that.
Well, it's a little bit complex. I mean, if you get a lot of people hypergridding in, that stresses the sim. If you get everybody standing up, that stresses the sim. That's why things like the OpenSim Community Conference.
There are some finite capacities in OpenSim later. There are some things that just have a set capacity and can go no further. And if those things, again, we've got the physics loop. The physics loop runs at, I believe, 11 FPS.
Last I knew.
If it takes more than that amount of time, things go wonky. And the same as that, the scene update loop runs at 11 FPS. And if that takes longer than 11 FPS, then you get what's called lag, because there was never any in the beginning. Again, back in the past,
I think
taking that long, so there was no effort made to mitigate the effects of that. Back then, we didn't have 50 users per sim. I believe OpenSim probably, in its entirety, had less than 50 users.
The wonderful thing, I mean, your answer, Marcus, I would agree with. I consider myself, obviously I live on OpenSim, but I live on the hypergrid, and that really is part of it. And one of the great things about Thursday's Safaris and Pathfinders before that, for that matter, is the fact that we do travel and jump all over the place. And it's got its drawbacks, because one week somebody will want to show off something, and they'll have contacted Thursdays to take Safari in, and we'll have a busy week. There'll be maybe 50 or 60 people on the Safari, and what we don't realize is that we're teleporting into a server on somebody's home computer. And
yes, it's one of the reasons why I've always tried to discourage people from home hosting.
Yeah, well, we get like hell, basically, but it's not just home hosting. There are regions that are very, not very robustly set up. It's nothing to do with the OpenSim code. It's just they're on old servers or machines that really can't handle stuff like that.
Limiting factor is usually the bandwidth and not the machine.
Yeah. But the wonderful thing about that hypergrid metaphor, of course, is that it connects us to all these possibilities, even the ones that are unusable. And so as the whole thing moves forward, then, hopefully all the destinations will move forward at their own pace. Some will probably be 10 years behind other people.
Not holding my breath.
Yeah, others will want to be on the cutting edge. Okay, after the hypergrid, while we're still on the history side of it, let's round up the history. What, since the hypergrid, do you consider to be landmarks, apart from the merging of Nations code?
Putting me on the spot here. What was their landmark? I was potentially some under the hood stuff, but to be honest, there really hasn't been a user visible landmark, and that appears to me as part of the reason why, and this is where we're getting into current territory, most of the users have become so married to 082. 082 has been around for ages, and it's been tried and proven, fixed and refixed, and it's like everybody's afraid of the new world that 09 takes them to, where everything changes, and 09 is a game changer. No question about that.
You have just provided me with the perfect segue that brings us up to date.
That was the intention.
When I was talking to Bob earlier, and he said, "Oh, there's these things you can ask her," and I said, "Well, it depends on the show. We're ad-libbing, we're talking. And anyway, I don't want to bore readers with minute detail that even probably I don't understand. But one of the things that he impressed upon me is that there hasn't been a major commit, as it were, of the OpenSim code for quite a long while. The last major one being 2 years ago. Now
it's a release, not a major commit. There have been major commits indeed.
Well,
sorry. A release. Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
There hasn't been a release. You need to understand the timeline of the Avination code drop. Now, the Avination code drop had been in train for a year before it was even announced. It was something that's been worked behind the scenes by Ubit, myself, Diva, and Mr. Blue. who all had access to the full Avenation repository at that point. No, I believe Diva didn't, because I don't know why actually, but Mr. Blue and Ubid had access to the full Avenation private repository, had access to the merged code, and they were helping me and working with me and getting the code to a point where it was even possible to merge it. And from that point onwards, there was a period of more than a year of consolidation, where even if you consider the ground had been pretty well prepared by that behind the scenes work, at the point the code actually dropped, we found such a lot of incompatibilities with older versions with unusual configurations that it took us like a year and a half to even get to the point to fix it to where the expected level of base functionality was back where people would expect OpenSim to be. Yes, the code drop initially threw OpenSim back. It threw OpenSim back in terms of usability, but in favor of added functionality. It becomes a question of whether you forever stay in one place, or you take 2 steps back and then 3 steps forward to get you into the future. And that's exactly what this merge was going to be, is always going to be, because Avenation had diverged so far over a period of 6 years where no code was contributed, more or less, between 2010 and 2016. Avenation contributed no code, and that had in part been caused by my extended illness. The cycles that I did have available had to go into running the company, not into contributing code.
Sure. Yeah.
I had multiple years of fighting with a unfortunately chronic and permanent illness, and I've bounced back eventually, and I'm at nearly 100% and getting better. But it's
I remember there was one point.
You sound very healthy. I'll say that.
I remember. Yeah, you've wanted to get you had wanted very badly to get the Aviation code in forever, and we did. You say you didn't do any code, and that's not 100% true. I remember, and it might have been for the 8.2 release. We had horrible inventory loading times. Do you remember that?
And, yes, I remember that. That was because sequence didn't work.
Yes, and
it was actually requested.
Hang on. One
parallel and was just overloading the server. And I did merge some of the Avenation code ahead of time.
Yes.
That
and
was
we were at users
inventory loading.
Yes, and as users, we were so thrilled. we were so happy you did that.
But everybody's like, for instance, bitching about the time of prem content loading. 09 fixes that. Get with it.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, if anybody else remembers that inventory loading, how it used to be, and now how it is now. I mean, think about that. Think about that.
Okay.
Spread across all the features of OpenSim. I mean, you have to think big.
Okay. Let's move forward as best we can here, because there's quite a lot, and we've been on there for a while. Coming back to, actually, I've got a very blunt question. The probably answer is you probably don't have a clue, but do you have any idea of a set date for the next formal release?
Well, OpenSim is actually ready for that. It's more or less a matter of resolving one sticky point, and the sticky point is mesh. You see,
Right.
Open Simulator has always had the
I was reading earlier.
a way of using the so-called visual mesh for collisions. Now, you have to understand, there is something that is called a visual mesh. It's what you see in the world when you have a mesh.
Oh, I know from Unity.
It has everything and whatever. Now, there's also something else that's called the collision mesh.
I know this from Unity. Yeah, I'm trying to make my studio seats with the collision mesh was a bit of a mess.
Much lower quality, and factors that most physics engines have an issue when the collision mesh has more than 64K faces.
Yeah.
Also, the collision mesh ideally should be all convex, because concave collisions take a lot more power to calculate.
Yeah.
So on Avination, the decision was taken to forego using the visual mesh as a collision mesh at all. If somebody didn't upload a collision mesh, we would try to do a convex approximation, and whoever that was not good enough for, they could go whistle for it.
Okay, I see. So before you continue, there's two specific things here, actually, that you might be able to help with. I know for working for, doing stuff to Adam and Rowan's instructions on sine wave, for example, I've got some lovely seating for a studio, and of course I loaded a collision mesh, which was basically a copy of the whole mesh, and then said, "No, it's actually."
And they said, "Fuck no."
Sorry.
They said, "F for no."
Yeah. Well, no, they just suggested I use like an Invisiprim style of collision mesh or whatever. but I was also reading in your OpenSim notes that I saw people were talking about the fact that when we use like a standard viewer like Firestorm here to upload mesh into OpenSim, there are a whole load of things like analyze and stuff in the Linden Lab button, which actually have no use whatsoever in OpenSim at all. Which is
wrong. There are 3 pages to a mesh upload. Page number 1 defines the mesh and the options for the mesh. Page number 2 is analyze. Don't even open it. Don't click the buttons. Page number 3 is collision mesh. Do use that. Do specify collision meshes from file.
Amen.
Specify decimation factors. Do specify the strategies for creating convex models. And then upload the mesh. Just don't use the analyze, because the analyze is based on some havoc stuff that OpenSim is not allowed to have.
Exactly. So it's a stupid.
I know what havoc costs. I won't tell you because it's under NDA, but I know what havoc costs, and I know it's a price bracket that Open Simulator as a project could never afford, not even with a crowdfunder.
Yeah, and more to the point, I just wish somebody had told me before I started uploading meshes here. And I thought, oh, I better analyze it, hadn't I? Now I know better.
Point is, if you try to use the visual mesh as a collision mesh, things will go south.
I would assume that something like
the ODE engine in Open Simulator use the visual mesh as the collision mesh if no collision mesh was given. The Bullet engine uses the visual mesh as the collision mesh, I believe, regardless, and ignores the actual collision meshes. I'm not certain about that, but I've been briefed, and I believe that's the way it is.
I'm pretty sure
the UBE uses the collision meshes, and if the collision meshes aren't there, it uses convex decomposition, and otherwise this thing just collides as phantom. But it will not use the visual mesh as the collision mesh unless the user sets the visual mesh as the collision mesh manually, in which case performance hits have to be taken.
I think I've actually got that, because
they've been uploaded under ODE that assume that the visual mesh is the same as the collision mesh, and under UBODE those meshes don't work anymore. Now,
this
with UBIT just today about this, and yes, the decision has been taken. UBODE will not be made to use the collision mesh, use the visual mesh as collision mesh on these, and I'm hoping that was one of the last decisions that had to be taken on issues that stand in the way of a release. As far as I'm concerned, the release can be cut at any time. Only the release has to be cut by Diva because she's the only one using Windows.
Okay, I have a question on this from, I guess, the layman's point of view. This region is currently running bullet physics, the region we're coming from today, as many do, and it's not on the 9 one, it's on an 8 something one. It's for
8.2
thing. Yeah. However, I have meshes in here right? They are meshes as opposed to sculpt maps, which I also use. They've come in fine. I haven't in OpenSim specified any collision mesh or anything else, and most of these meshes are my terrain, right? Not nice sort of hills and stuff like that. And in terms of physics, they respond fine, just as if it was real terrain under my feet. Now, does this mean that if I move to the Series 9 release and change to ODE, that these terrains I have will suddenly become phantom?
Get a parachute.
They will be right. So in fact, I should be very careful what I'm doing here.
You need to tread carefully.
Right, because the other thing that I assumed was that if I brought in a mesh that didn't have a collision map, then I would take the same advice Adam gave me in Unity for sine wave, and that is I would simply create my own collision map by using invisiprims to make sure people sat in the right place.
You know, the sad truth is.
But what you need to do on the terrain meshes is you need to switch them from prim to convex.
Yeah.
For terrain, that's sufficient.
Oh, okay. That's no problem. I know how to do that. In fact, I think I may have done that with many of them anyway. They work better that way. Yeah, okay.
You know, and the sad truth is...
Do you know what a convex decomposition is?
I don't know the full kind of details, but I've been told the same things in Unity. You know, if a mesh doesn't work, you can switch between convex and
I kind of wish I could res a prim because I could show you an approximation for like one of these chairs or something. But
okay, I think you can if you want.
No, I can't res.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. I'll have to change your tag, wouldn't I? Okay.
That's okay. That's okay. But yeah. Imagine these chairs were a cube.
That's a prim.
And imagine that the top was tilted down. So basically, nobody needs to necessarily walk on the lap of the chair. This is I'm talking about a very, very simple convex hull. But that's going to make the physics engine a lot happier. I mean, basically, from a layman's perspective, a convex hull is a very simplified version of the meshes.
Yes, but layman indeed, in so far as that a prim can have a more complex physical representation than a purpose-made collision mesh.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, even a simple cube. Well, let's just hot seat here. A simple cube, as you res it as it comes up, when you right-click and say create, how many faces does that simple cube have?
Right. Yeah, it has.
How many faces does it have?
I think it has. Let me think.
It's triangles, isn't it? It's not. It's quite a lot. It's not. I
think it's 64, isn't it?
No,
I think
it has 24 faces.
Oh, 24.
24.
Oh, are we talking quads or tris?
Tris. It's got 24 faces because each face is split into 8 tris. Don't ask me why. Ask Dahlia.
Okay.
back in Second Life, when it first came in, we found a very odd trick, which is probably related to this, and that is that if you built something in prims, right, depending on what it was, the result was different. It was before they had land weights and stuff. It was just calculated in prims. You could often create like 4 walls and a roof and stuff like that to make a little house, and I don't know, it would be 12 prims maybe. And once you link them together, you could convert them to a convex hull, and suddenly the weight on the land would actually drop down to about 4. Now, it would depend on the structure of what you did, how many it sort of combined, as it were. But we suddenly realized we could do this because, people working on parcels with tiny, like 200 prims suddenly thought, well, I can actually create 600 prims and convert, maybe with a bit of cleverness, I can actually link them and convert them to convex hulls. And of course, the count in prims suddenly goes down when they are convex hulls. So
you mean a land impact, because prims were just literally prims. So yes. Every object would be so many prims. But then on the other hand, worn items never counted against that, so people could actually work on huge items far exceeding the capacity of their land by just resing them, linking them to something they had attached, and working on that.
Yeah.
Now, you know, anytime you highlight any part of an attachment, the attachment gets frozen in space. If you switch to local coordinate system, you can edit the attachment as if it was sitting on the ground. You can build things that wouldn't ever fit into your parcel. Well, and then there was the about temporary holidays.
There's a chap called, I think it was the Predator in Hughes in real life, used to work for IBM and has a company called Feeding Edge. And I think he was the first person who introduced me to the concept of what do you do when you're a presenter and you want to give a presentation to people on a nice elaborate set, say like this, right? But you don't have any land or anything like that. Well, what he did is he simply linked the whole stage set together, right? And as a single object, then he wore it and he repositioned it underneath it. So where his avatar went, the whole stage set went with him because he was wearing it.
There's actually a way of doing whole cities in a sandbox by making the cities wearable, and in order to fix them in special position, you just sit down on a prem, which makes your wearables be positionally stable for editing.
Yeah. And then you load
fun times.
It's amazing the tricks we can get up to when somebody shows us.
It's also quite amazing about the Christmas tree of death.
Do tell. What's that?
Okay, there was a Christmas tree. It came out in, I think, 2014 in SL, no less. So it was a Christmas tree that would have the candles on the tree change their color. A very simple 3-prem affair. And any 6 of them in a sim would kill the sim.
Oh dear. What, because of the scripting or?
Yes, it was just so bad.
Yeah.
So killing an SL sim with only 6 objects, that was like a first. It hasn't been happened since 2006.
Poor old Lindens. I bet they didn't like that one.
Actually, I was called in by a friend of mine into SL because she was saying her sim was lagging like hell and nobody could buy her sex toys. And, I and my team, we just went and analyzed everything and checked it out and found out it's the Christmas trees. She's had like a forest of them, 12 or so.
Oh, God. Right, so it was
and nobody could move. Nobody could move because of a bug in the Second Life viewer that would react adversely to a large number of texture changes in the region. This is one of the reasons, by the way, why I assigned a threat level to the texture drawing functions in OpenSim, because they do the same thing. They force the viewer to keep reloading textures and it clogs up the pipe.
And I came across a similar problem with, actually, I think it was OpenSim specific, rotation scripts. Badly coded, use up a lot of process. But
a rotation script isn't supposed to use LLZ road. It's supposed to use LLZ target omega.
Yeah, so the problem was rotation scripts near region borders or sim borders. And it was just bringing sims to a standstill or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I keep them enclosed now. Okay.
Needs to be aware of his sensors, because sensors on every 6th scan will reach across a region border.
Yeah.
Causing network traffic. And if the region is down, bye-bye script.
And if I might step back to the talk about 0.9 and UBODE for a second.
Yes. You need to do that because my time is growing short.
Okay. I just want to emphasize, and I really hate to say this to people out there, but the fact of the matter is, the unfortunate fact of the matter is that people have been uploading meshes incorrectly. I mean, unfortunately, if anybody complains that switching to UBODE breaks their meshes, I'm sorry, I really am, but it's because you've been doing it wrong. And so keep that in mind. I don't want this, I don't want another great, sit location debate to break out among people. Oh, I'm not going to switch to this version because it breaks all my sits or it breaks all my meshes. It's not breaking them. They were broken to begin with.
Indeed. You are so right.
I have okay. Of course I have.
Of course, in this round, you're preaching to the perverted.
Okay, I know that you don't like Sims running on local computers like this one is, but
no,
I have
them. I am just trying to discourage people from them because it's going to bite them in the back.
Okay,
well, I think
I just need to ask this because it's the same thing Marcus raised here. When 9 comes in, it would make my inclination will be to load a new region because this is just one huge file region at the moment, and on that new region, run the 9.0 release and the ODE physics. Now, on the same machine, can those run concurrently, or would another region have to be running the same code base?
You are actually confusing the concepts. A region is just that, a region. It's a plot of land of arbitrary size that is something running in a simulator.
Yeah.
And a simulator, also referred to as an instance, is an executable file that reads a configuration file starting Open Simulator. Now, if you're talking about running a mixed setup, you will definitely need to have 2 different binary directories, one of them containing 082 and one of them containing 09.
Right.
Each running a separate instance with however many regions. You will definitely need to use a grid setup unless you want to hypergrid between the two.
Yeah, you've given me the answer I needed. So if the mesh I'm putting down here is quite literally FUT, which you may well be, as part of my language, which it may well be when the new OpenSim comes, then I'm in a pickle, aren't I? But that's my problem, not yours. Right,
if the mesh is phantom, you can actually go and reconvert the mesh to an object and re-upload it using correct parameters.
True. Yeah.
Format of meshes in the OpenSim database isn't really that complicated, and I actually have a tool to reconvert them and encode them back into objects. I just don't know where I put it. As someone I developed while I was working on OpenSim.
I was just going to say, give me a copy, but if you don't know where it is, that's not very helpful.
It's somewhere. It's somewhere in these about 8 terabytes.
What? 8 terabytes?
Yeah, that's my desktop machine.
Oh no, sorry. I thought you meant the tool for doing the conversion is 8 terabytes.
No, I meant somewhere these 8 terabytes.
Oh, you've lost it in 8 terabytes. Fair enough. I know what that's.
I've got so many different hard disks and stuff attached. There's hard disks laying up here on the desk. There's hard disks below. There's hard disks built in, and I'm not even talking about the SAN downstairs.
Yeah, I get that. I get that too. I've got 3 2 terabyte disks and a couple of 1 terabyte disks, and I think of the cumulative total.
Yeah. I mean, it's like
where did I put it?
it's like storage space has become so cheap. The only thing that I take care of is everything is RAID 1.
All right. I just like keeping everything away from the operating system disk, basically, if I can help it.
Yeah, my partner does that. I don't. I don't do flying, you know what? Just back up the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll do that. Anyway, that is to be tackled later. Well, I know we kept you longer than you planned to be here. So I'm just going to look at. I need a prompt here from this meeting on questions. That's James. Have you got any? Because James get on the news gives he tries to attend the developers meeting every Tuesday and give us a brief roundup of things discussed. So no, yes, he commented on that.
I can't be ours if it's just complainers moaning.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, that is one of the things that I've got in here. But maybe, James, do you have any specific questions? I mean, I know you follow all this.
Well, I really appreciate this discussion because it really clarified why the discussion about mesh was the bulk of the conversation last Tuesday. And I think my question for Melanie would be, I get the impression that the permissions issue is feeling pretty resolved. Is that true?
It's been resolved to my satisfaction. There may be another corner or edge case or bug in there. I can't really say, but if it is, then it's nothing that our newly development human level testing procedures, and it's nothing that my unit tests have picked up on.
Yeah.
So at this point in time, I am using the permissions as they are, and I have yet not seen any exploiting. And everybody else should be encouraged to use it. That issue is resolved. The thing is about the meshes now, and I really got to say, we cannot in perpetuity support meshes that are broken, because they've been broken during about a year and a half of people uploading, not knowing what the hell they're doing.
Sure.
These meshes just need to be discarded, re-uploaded, fixed, or whatever, but we cannot per default use the visual mesh as a collision mesh, because that way lie dragons, and we don't want to go there, and this has got to be fixed the right way. Otherwise we're going to be stuck in lag hell forever, and we're never competing with anything out there.
Yeah. No, that sounds very straightforward and very solvable, really.
It just means some people need to stop the whining and start acting.
That's right.
This leads me on to a couple of other questions. People. I can't think of a really polite way of saying this, but there are people around. Yeah, you see them at the IMA, but you see people like Freaky Tech with Ariba Sim and stuff like that, who do tend to, well, like you said, you don't go to developers meetings. They do tend to moan that there is an awful lot of, drama, and you've got to appreciate all these people are volunteers, so it's not like there's a boss there that can get things done fast.
Precisely. I mean, it's all a moaning. It's getting my hackles up anyway. Even the Brexit remoaning, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, seriously, I'm actually from the European Union, and yeah, I'm a Brexiteer. So what, sue me?
Interesting. I've always considered myself a European, and I was not the Brexit. Anyway, we won't go into that.
You want to knuckle under Mama Merkel?
We'll stick to virtual tiers or virtual. No, I don't know what I'm talking about. Right, virtualeering. That's in engineering or something. Right. Now, I have a couple of questions on the new release when it happens. Right. Are there any changes? Not so much that you just mentioned inventory loading. Are there any changes to things like inventory and indeed communications across the hypergrid? For example, we sometimes it's very difficult, moving stuff around in speed of moving stuff around in inventories as you go places, but also in communications. For example, you can, even if you've got VVox, you can't. It may be a problem with the free version of VVox, but you can't make a VVox call to another avatar or a group like you can in Lyndon's thing.
Well, this is the state of affairs. Avination has actually never wanted to do anything, and has never committed anything regarding to the hypergrid. In fact, Avination has been actively removing hypergrid code where it got in our way. Avination wasn't hypergrid able, and it wasn't intended to be. Right. So part of the year and a half of the development that was done after the merge in the open was to put a lot of that hypergrid functionality back. Right. The 0.9 release offers no improvements on hypergrid over the 0.8.2. It really offers the 0.8.2 hypergrid ability being put back into Open Simulator. because Open Simulator after the 0.9 merge simply wasn't capable of hypergridding successfully anymore at all.
Oh, good grief! Oh, we don't want that.
No, it's been resolved. It's one of the things that took so long. Now,
Right.
Vivox is a different story because Vivox, as a commercial company, there is no such thing as the free Vivox, but every grid instead has to apply for a key to Vivox,
Yeah.
and it's not spanning grids. So voice calls between grids are not now and never will be a possibility unless somebody does come up with a functioning mumble murmur integration that is scalable enough to allow multiple grids and multiple configurations. And I don't see that happen because that chat system simply doesn't support something like worldwide groups.
I know some people, Mike Laurie, and also some people that I may have mentioned, exploring chat servers that, as an alternative that would be hypergrid wide. But obviously that's a completely separate thing, and whether it's plug-in kind of hard or whether it's something that might be contributed to code, I don't know. The other thing, though,
closing note, I'm going to have to say that I am currently administering a major OpenSim grid that is well known, but that I don't officially affiliate with.
Right.
That is hypergrid enabled and does run 0.9 successfully.
Right.
So yes, 0.9 is ready for prime time on the hypergrid. It does require mono above 4.2.3, which means it does require clean DNS. It's one of the contentious issues that's often being brought up by Smexy in chat. He is of the opinion that his grid, being primarily a hypergrid hub, could not possibly suffer this setback of being stuck in a situation where certain grids are not hypergrid reachable. However, Mono itself, not Open Simulator, enforces that every host that Mono connects to be forward reverse resolvable, meaning it needs to have clean DNS. The name that it reports as having as its own name needs to match the IP address that is returned, or rather, when resolved against to an IP address, needs to be an IP address that is in the list of hosts that is returned when trying to forward resolve the name. That's called double reverse resolution. And new Mono does require an intact double reverse resolution on everything it connects to, which means that people who are home hosting are pretty much SOL until Miguel de Casa, Mono's author, sees the error of his ways and allows fuzzy DNS resolution again. We try to work around it. We managed to cover some of the cases, but in most of the cases, it means that somebody needs to be using Dyn DNS or a similar service to publish their home services IP address, and they need to be working with a server that is capable of assigning a forward reverse resolvable address to their server.
Coming back to mine again briefly, basically it's Third Federix's Outworlds install I have here, and somebody asked me about this because as you saw when you logged in, the address is for metaworld.outworlds.net, and that actually apparently takes care of all the, when you install it, it automatically takes care of port forwarding and loopbacks and all that stuff. So presumably, if you do have a home install, and remember this isn't designed to be a public grid, this particular one, then that would still work fine because Outworlds handle the DNS.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and that's basically, what I did was I used a dynamic IP, service for many, many years, and they were wonderful. They were a wonderful service, but I finally got to the point where I said, I need an actual domain. And you can do that very easily, even with a home hosting by, I use Google Domains, and that cleans everything up. I run Mono 5.0, which is, about as new as you can get, and everything works just fine, So basically,
yes, that's the point, but everybody's expecting to have login.mygreatgrid.com, which then as an IP address resolves back to ns22-51.43 at homenetip.com, which then forward resolves to different IP, and they hope that works, and it just will not and does not and should not, because it just opens the door to all sorts of exploitation, including people logging into a completely different grid from the one that they would expect to be logging into, and potentially spending money where they wouldn't want to spend money.
Well, I'm a huge penny pincher. That's part of the reason why I host from home. But I pay $12 a year. I could afford $12 a year for a domain. And using something like Google Domains makes it very easy.
It's like not doing like that is like pure folly, and everybody who thinks they can just host on a naked IP address, again, as I said, blunt as I am, they can go whistle.
Well, I have plenty of domains. Like I've got Metaworld Spaces, which is barely used because it was meant to be a lot of embeddable words. But presumably, I could just arrange for my address to be that domain and set up some kind of routing that comes here.
All I'm saying is 0.9 is perfectly capable of being used in hypergrid at the point where people are ready to put their money where their mouth is, and everybody else shouldn't have visitors anyway, because they might just as well be doing phishing or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's got to be some sort of an authentication, and in the internet, the authentication between two mutually non-trusting entities has always been the wallet.
Yeah, damn right.
So that's willing to spend 200 and something a month on a domain certificate, then they must mean it. And if somebody's willing to spend 1,400 on a full domain validation through VeriSign, they really mean it. And everybody who doesn't want to spend the money should be out of the game.
Yeah, and there's as far as like if you need a certificate, there's free alternatives. There's Let's Encrypt, which is a wonderful service.
Yes, it's free certificates, but it doesn't give you DNS and doesn't give you valid IP addresses.
No. I know that. I know. I'm just I'm
cert-bot in-grid installations, and it works just perfectly fine.
Well, and the other thing when it comes to home hosting is, I've been a home hoster for well over a decade now, and so I really I'm kind of torn about it. I'm going to make a lot of saying this, but there are people who just shouldn't be running sims or grids, or I'm sorry, don't hate me. You have to have it. You have to have a certain level of savvy to run a simulator well. You have to have the right hardware. You have to have the appropriate amount of bandwidth. You have to, you can't go running 20 simulators on your laptop. You just on a DSL line. You just can't do that.
People are trying to do that. That's the thing.
I know. I
succeed with it. I've had so many people come at me over the years. They're saying like I've got this 48 core Intel server with 64 gigabyte of RAMs. Can I run 1,000 regions on that?
I mean, you've only got to come on.
Real life example. This question is actually posed to me.
You've only got to come on Safari to know the proof of the pudding there, to sort of people have these regions. I mean, I actually don't like I don't like your expression home hosting. You know, because I think of this as my offline world, even though the world offline is not accurate because it's on the hypergrid, but it's private. It's somewhere to do stuff and play, and anything I'm happy with, I will then upload to somewhere like Great Canadian Grid, where which I consider to be the public.
Well, we could actually throw a crimp into your game by publishing the URL, say, on Facebook.
You know,
well, I will then just have to disable hypergrid visitors and have it access this only.
I can personally testify that if you're on the hypergrid, people will find you. Because that's what I do. I have my own private little. It's just for me. It's 4 regions. Yet, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, Thursday Ember came through with her hypergrid group. Said we would love to stop on your grid, and I'm like, you're welcome to stop on my grid. Just be aware that I run such and such hardware. I can probably only support this many users, and you know, I'm like, and how did you find me?
Oh, that's not. I mean, you know, I'm listed on the Outworlds directory. I'm also listed on Inworld, where I've got a beacon here. I'm not too bothered about that. If people want to come in and have a look, that is fine. But I'm, you know, we're doing this show here in an emergency. We're doing this show here in an emergency, but I mean, I am getting quite a lot of people popping in, snooping around, and fine. But you know, so long as it doesn't become 20 people descending on the region at once, I'm not really too bothered. You know, you know, it's not meant to be totally private and confidential and secret. It's just that, you know, my public stuff goes to our HQ on the Great Canadian Grid. This is my private space, but you're welcome to pop in. You know,
hey, let's just crash this party in 150 avatars on this within 5 minutes. Who wins?
I'm dead in the water. Okay, one final question, actually, talking of visitors popping in. Is there anything in the new release that will put paid to the bloody unknown avatar?
Well, there is the UMMAU, which we haven't quite got a handle on because it's an actual failing on the Linden protocol. I think, except for that one, we've got them all ironed out. The issue is that the viewer will actually ask the sim that is currently connected to for any info on any avatars on the sim that is going to be connecting to.
Yeah.
Which means that if you're hypergrid teleporting into a region where there are already avatars, it will ask the source, not the destination region, about avatars that are in the destination region, and the source region obviously can't answer. The solution that I have suggested but hasn't been implemented yet is for the source region to connect to the hypergrid transfer and ask the destination region, then return the proper information. But it seems that that is more complicated in practice than it sounds like when I say it. So no, UMMAU0 is going to stay with us for a bit more.
Yeah, so it's really related to the hypergrid itself when we get
it's Linden Viewer. Linden Viewer, when it gets a UUID from a region, should ask that region for the UUID's name rather than using its default region, which may be on another grid. But then again, the Linden Viewer was never intended to be used across grids and across different authentication domains. So obviously, it wouldn't know that. And it just uses any region because in Linden Labs environment, in Second Life, any region can give information on any avatar because they're all contacting the same central services. In OpenSim, that's not the case.
Okay, final question for me because I know you're running out of time and we've been on a while, right? I know that if we found $50,000 for Krista, she would be quite happy to build a new viewer that is OpenSim specific. Do you think?
Did she say so?
Yeah, she says so. Yeah. Do you think we we talk about the OpenSim code base and everything else. We're talking about things here that are server side as a rule, right? The other half of the equation is always the viewer, the client side. Do you think we are within reaching space of some kind of dedicated OpenSim hypergrid viewer that will work more efficiently with the code base and hopefully get rid of all the Linden legacy stuff we have no use for?
No. And I also don't believe that 50,000 is going to be enough for Diva to engineer a team that is capable of writing a new viewer that can satisfy the demands being placed in Open Simulator today. That's because with the prospect of an investor doing this and already 3 months of work having been done on the project, I have definitely scoped it out and priced it at 120,000 and no less.
Right. And I have a feeling you got to remember she's an academic, so she often works with things like grants and things like that. So she may be
everything, but I'm talking about a purely commercial thing, and where she's an academic. I'm actually a businesswoman, and I'm looking at the upsides, downsides, and the crossways and around and everything about it. And I'm saying 120K is what it takes, and no more.
No, and I'm only saying that the 50,000 may just be a jumping board. You know, as an academic, she can start something and then say, "Look, here are the results. Give me more grants." You know, so you know.
Yes, in a way, yes, but it means that she would eventually have to give up control to quangos that set out to determine the academic worth of the project rather than worth to the community, which may well fall short. So to say, I don't put much stock in that. I'm standing my ground on saying that 120K is about the amount of effort that it takes to put forward something that has any chance of replacing the Second Life viewer. Now, okay, I have definitely put that in perspective. Diva isn't looking to replace the Second Life viewer. She is looking into a different user experience without editing capabilities, and that it may be possible to do within that frame, although I still consider that frame rather tight, and I would say that it would be nearer to 45, I mean, sorry, to 45K to actually get that done. The idea that I'm taking this from is the fact that she's commissioned the on-look viewer, a viewer that allows you to look but not interact with the world, and that is because they are actually over there at what's them again? The company she works with Swedish outfit.
And Citra.
Yes. And in Citra, they are actually working on making virtual worlds more palatable for architects. And architects shy away from things that involve an avatar, and they don't need editing. All they want to do is move to the camera the way they're used to it from their major CAD packages that already offer a sort of approach to that, just not at this scale.
So just a pathway. She's
therefore talking about a different kind of animal than the kind of animal I'm talking about.
Yeah, I must admit, when I'm still third thing,
would it be possible to render a Second Life scene or an OpenSim scene entirely within the Unreal game engine using Unreal's famous lighting? I've got it working. I have my hard disk fired up anytime. And now I'm doing the same thing with the Zenko engine.
Oh, fascinating. We could be here all night, really, couldn't we? I must admit, the on-look viewer is the default with the Third's Outworlds install here. And but I very rarely use it. I just, it's sort of... you can hide your avatar, you can do all that sort of stuff, but yeah, I'm used to building.
Basic premise is that it simplifies the world to the point where the learning curve gets flat enough for the average user to enjoy the world immediately and then learn more later. And it's a great approach.
We were talking about embeddable worlds on the web, and the web metaphor is kind of inappropriate, except for some quick, hey, come and see my region. You can walk around, you can sit, and you can't do anything else.
Well, you can't even do that because WebGL just simply cannot render 15,000 prims, much less 15,000 meshes. Period. Now,
and interface-wise, I load the envelope viewer, and I almost feel like I am in a web version because where's all my stuff I want? It's not here.
It's not there, and it's not meant to be there. It's just the point. The point is flat learning curve for people who want to take the plunge to choose the steeper learning curve at a later time, but first for them to get their toes wet. I fully appreciate that, and I'm all for it. I'm just saying it's not the be all and end all.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, what I'm seeing is virtual worlds is going different directions. Virtual worlds going forward as a flat world viewer, second lifestyle, virtual world, social interaction. Yes, that's one of the things I'm seeing. Virtual world going forward to full virtuality, and I'm seeing virtual worlds going forward into augmented reality, where actually I'm hopefully not wrong saying that within 30 years we are going to see a completely parallel Earth with annotations, with extras, with objects that don't exist in the real world, that we can at will superimpose on the real world to gain more information or work with things that aren't otherwise possible. I mean, one of the things that is, even though it's annoying as hell, it's a direction that we need to go in is, wait for it, Pokemon Go.
Yeah. Now, do you know that I was reading in the week, maybe in the week before actually, but recently, I guess it's an API or something that Apple have released for their AR thing and the new iOS when it comes out. Well, somebody's managed to rig that up, and it's technically AR, but basically they can the idea is they can make it could be an avatar, but the idea is they can kind of make a FaceTime call, and the person you're speaking to, you're gonna hold up your iPad or whatever, and you look through the camera to your sitting room floor, and there's like a hologram kind of avatar of the person you're talking to. So yeah, I can see that crossover starting happening very quickly, especially if Apple are moving.
Yeah, but that'll still be the flat world. It's going to be 3D, true 3D. Well, currently I'm involved with an effort to leverage some new kind of near-eye optics to allow an AR experience that hasn't been seen before.
Is that light field technology?
Well, it's a waveguide technology, but it's a patent that's being only exploited now, even though patents existed for 10 years, which allows us to project into the eye an object that is much larger than the surface that does the projecting. So you have like something that's about the size of 4 sewing needles protruding from some sort of rig like glasses in front of your eye, and can fill your field of vision if it wants to.
Yeah, that's that offers a lot of potential. I think we're only touching.
There's a company that doesn't sell to hobbyists. It only supplies engineering samples to bona fide companies, and they don't provide this kind of support that you would expect from a company that supplies to makers. They're really geared to servicing just the industry. And in the next few weeks, I'm in a position to obtain some engineering samples from them.
Oh, nice.
And it'll be a steep learning curve even for me, I'm sure. But the results are going to be so mind-blowing.
You know, come the end of this show, I'm always saying, you know, we can't even dream of what the future holds, and it's all happening so quickly.
Dream, right?
Sorry?
I said I can dream, all right.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I can dream, but I can't imagine. You know, I'll be dead before the dreams come true. Really.
So, do tell us what's your age?
Me?
Yeah.
I am the same age as the Beatles song. There you go.
Depending on which one you're talking about.
Is there another one?
Will you still feed me? Will you still feed me?
Probably not, because I know.
Yes. You're a bit older than I am, but I'm definitely not considering myself to be a material for the scrap heap at this point.
Yeah.
I may have more than 5 decades, but I think I got 5 more decades on the clock.
And do you think you could, and after that, you'll simply upload yourself into cyberspace?
Potentially. I wouldn't say no.
I wouldn't say no either. I must say, that should be.
Have you ever gone through all the implications of the potential effects on your sanity or on your mind that are caused by immortality? Have you ever considered ennui? Have you ever considered
I have, for sure. I read a lot of science, or used to read a lot of science fiction, and that is one of the, you know, that's been a major theme in the past. You know, what price immortality? You get bored. You know what? You know, it's an issue. I don't. You know, it's would you get bored? Would it?
I don't consider it an issue. Actually, for me, I don't. Because the way I see it, there's no difference for me. There's no difference between losing my mind in this universe or the total dissolution of personality, which is what happens at death. There is no ever after.
Yeah. It's a wide mystery. I don't know. I would not, you know, I would like to be able to hang on long enough to say, well, you know, you can donate my organs for this, but I want my memories and personality up in the cloud. But
gotta say atheist here.
Yeah, and then of course, as soon as I got up there and all was happy, then there'd be some kind of war on Earth, and all the servers would be out of business.
You know,
yeah, you'd blue screen.
One thing that I could potentially consider more boring than playing a harp for the rest of eternity, and that's listening to Vogan poetry.
Who?
Vogan poetry.
Hitchhiker's Guide.
I see you haven't read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Ah, right. Okay. So yeah, right.
42 and all that.
I've read that once, but I haven't forgotten. I don't remember that. I vaguely remember. Now I didn't hear the word poetry.
And the captain actually made him listen to Vogan poetry, and Vogan poetry to anybody non-Vogan is deadly.
And of course, it's probably all possible in the virtual universe, or the metaverse as we call it. I think that is our cue to start rapping.
The metaverse is actually going to become the multiverse, the universe, and then probably the megaverse.
Are you familiar, Manny, with the papers Will Burns writes? He's been on the show a few times. He's around Second Life, but he's not that keen on open sim. But he has this, he has this construct of a kind of future a virtual scenario, I suppose. You know, he starts with the metadata, and then he has meta worlds, and then he has meta galaxies, and then he goes up to the metaverse. And you know, his blueprint, as it were, you know, accommodates all sorts of things. You know, like OpenSim would just be a small model in that whole schematic. But I think you know, and it sounds very like spacey, doesn't it? You know, but it's quite well thought out. The idea that, you know, everything be controlled by the underlying metadata, the scaling of things would be worlds, followed by galaxies, followed by what would ultimately be the virtual metaverse.
Well, potentially so. I can't say I'm familiar with his writings in particular, but all I can say is that digitization and the digital world going on is definitely what's going to happen. I don't believe in conventional deities, and I don't believe in the ever after.
No.
I don't to some degree. I don't believe in souls to some degrees. I do, but I would rather stay here than go on and lose who I am, just to become an amorphous soul, to animate a new person, to develop into someone else. Where's my gain in that? Pardon me. Just don't see that happening. So I would much rather live in an environment which people today would potentially call cyberpunk, than go quietly into that dark night.
In other words, you want augmentation as opposed to full immersion, as the old debate used to be once upon a time. Yeah, I'm like you. I don't believe in deities and all that sort of stuff. But I will ask you one question. Do you agree with Elon Musk that we are living in a simulation?
I can't say that I do, and I can't say that I don't. I can't disprove it, and I can't prove it, nor can I say that I have any given preference about it.
Yeah.
But only one that if there are any simulators, that I hope that they will set up the simulation in such a way that I get what I want.
Yes, why not? Yeah. that is about the only attitude you can take, really, on these profound philosophical questions.
Can I change my .ini file?
There are more profound philosophical questions than these, to be honest.
Oh, sure, but within our context, we get into quite a lot of them, I've got to admit.
The philosophical and cosmogonic questions that I routinely discuss across the dinner table would probably leave many people totally stumped.
You've got to invite me to dinner. It sounds like just my cup of tea.
We're in the same country.
We are, yes. Where are you? I'm in London.
I'm about 72 miles away.
Fine, not impossible.
Since I don't have that many fans, but even more haters on the air, I'm not going to say anything else.
Oh, wise, probably very wise. Okay, yeah, you don't want to give your village out; they might come round.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm very safe when I say London, because people think, well, yeah, that's a bit of a big place, though.
Yeah.
Yes, it is, but give me a postcode.
Yeah, well, quite, yeah. That was actually blown long ago. The actual square I live in was actually in Second Life. I didn't put it there, by the way, but the person that did immediately wanted me to be the first president, because my house, my building was there. So that put pay to that, and meetups in the local pub also put pay to it, but never mind. That's another story. Okay, before we wrap, once again, Marcus and James, let's start with Marcus. Any final questions for Mandy? We've got her.
Yeah, actually one. I realize we're already like 3 hours in, so simply yes or no or partial will do as an answer. But one of the things I was hoping for with 0.9 is, and it's not something I personally played with, but I'd like to play with, is Project Bento support. Is it going to have that?
Not 0.9, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, my mesh avatar can't wait to get bendy, or I mean bentery or something. Right, now James.
Just get yourself some lunch for you.
Some sushi.
That always helps, yeah. James.
No, I'm good. I love the philosophical discussion, and that dinner sounds really good, actually.
Yes.
That dinner conversation.
Yeah.
I think we have a thread of that running on this show, you know. I don't know whether it's just you and me, James,
perhaps,
where we quite often get into diversions along those lines.
Where are you at? Are you within reach?
No, I'm in the United States.
That's just a big pond in between. Jump over it.
That's true.
Yes,
I'd have to get on an airline.
The Great Atlantic Hypergate.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
James and I aren't that far apart.
Yeah, we're very close. That's right.
Well, Mal, if and when we do meet, we'd have to go for Thai.
Right, as long as it's a meat-free Thai, I'm happy. I don't eat meat.
You can take something from the menu that isn't meaty.
Yeah, I know.
There's lots of stuff there.
You actually,
there's the Elephant Royale, which is a restaurant across from the Faces nightclub in Essex. They know us pretty well, and that might be a nice place.
You know, actually, by the way, that I think we have met briefly in real life. Bob Wellman mentioned this earlier because it was Chris Hart was there. So was Justin. It was in London.
Oh, you mean that pub meeting?
Yeah, and I think it was in Vauxhall Bridge Road, if I remember rightly. It was.
Could be.
Yeah. And I can't really.
Justin pretty much monopolized me.
Yeah, I can't remember much about it actually, except for the fact Slim Warrior arrived after me instead of before me, and I was talking to Chris. Yeah,
did you actually look into the glass too deeply?
Yeah, it was Justin and Chris Hart were the ones I was talking to mostly. But yeah, it's a while ago now, but we may well have encountered each other.
Yay! So up for a second time?
Yes. Yes, why not? We will plan.
Flying. I'm in London at least once a week.
Oh, what, downtown? Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, if it's down here, easy. I'll just pop out.
Yay.
I'm very bad at the English daytime thing. I don't normally get up till after lunch, but yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll arrange something. Let me know. Let me know when you're my way, then, for example, and we'll arrange.
Once every week. Like I'm down again next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. Good. Sounds good. Okay, we'll grab it.
After that, I don't know the day yet. And the week after that, I won't be in London.
Huh.
I'm quite mobile.
Very good.
You know, Mobilis Properly, also known as the Mob.
The Mob?
The
Mob? The Mob? What's this?
The Latin Mobilis Properly means population in motion, people in motion.
Oh,
it's the lingual root of the word the mob.
Oh, cool.
I did not know
That's
that.
good.
Very good. Well, when you say mob, I think of something entirely different.
I could bring a gun.
Oh, no. Don't want dinner with a gun. I'm not having that.
Just be an air gun. Totally legal and lethal only from a yard or less.
Well, we better choose a Thai restaurant with one of those big long banquet tables where I'm not within range.
Don't worry about it. Anyway, way I see it, the entire conversation, the direction it's taking, is literally calling for a tortilla. I mean, a wrap.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, oh, very
good. Very good.
Very good. That's. Do you know Cockney slang? I don't, but it sounds like a variation of Cockney slang. That. Okay. Yes, it is a wrap, folks.
It was like leaning that way. I mean, yeah, no Cockney slang. The parts are public anyway, like taking a butcher's.
Yeah.
You know about that one, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I know what taking a butcher's means. It's taking a look. Really,
yeah, it comes from butcher's hook.
Yeah, butcher. Yeah, quite. Yeah, some of it's lost on me, but I know the phrases as well. So even though I might not know the origin, I know what they mean.
I know the origins as well.
Yeah, oh, well.
Things.
You're the encyclopedia, the Warrior Encyclopedia.
Yes, remember on the spectrum here?
Very good. Okay, well, look, I'm going to call it a wrap because we've probably been on long enough. What is it today? Just over 2.5 hours. We did start late, so it's that bad. I'd like to thank everybody who's here. I'd like to thank.
And you are very welcome, and thank you. And bye-bye, and bye-bye, and take care, and tomorrow, and whatever.
Okay, and don't poof until I've done the outro.
Really?
I would also like to thank Marcus Llewellyn. Thank you, Marcus.
Are you going to keep me?
Sorry, did they catch that? I'd like to thank Marcus Llewellyn. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Mal. It was happy to be here.
Okay, and of course, thanks to James Out Loud, also multitasking on all our cameras.
I'm also very happy to be here, and I always enjoy hearing what Melanie has to say.
Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
Really, she says.
Really.
Absolutely astounded. Yes. Why do you think we asked you here? We want to hear what you have to say.
For entertainment value?
For information.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Information. That's the key. Entertainment. It's information. That, of course, is what the WWW is meant to be about.
Enlightenment.
And enlightenment.
Yeah.
And philosophical
But you don't even know a thing about enlightenment, which is a Windows manager for GNOME, long before your time.
Okay.
We better stop while the going's good, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching, whether it's live or in replay. Hope you've enjoyed the show. We'll be back, same time, same place next week. Actually, we might be in a different place, come to think of it, but I've forgotten. We're in a strange place today. Not that you know it, same backdrop. Wish you all a very good morning, very good afternoon, very good evening, and indeed a good tomorrow for the benefit of Australians and such like. Wherever and whenever you are. I will see you soon. Bye for now.